In 1859, a quiet naturalist published a book that shattered humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Today, we hold the power to rewrite the very code of life itself, to edit genes like text, to eliminate diseases that have plagued us for millennia, to perhaps even direct our own evolution. But as we stand on the threshold of becoming the architects of life, we find ourselves caught between two ancient questions. Are we fulfilling our destiny as thinking beings, or are we committing the ultimate act of hubris? Are we the products of blind natural forces, or are we somehow special, created in the image of something greater? Tonight, we don't just explore what we can do with genetic engineering. We ask what we should do. We summon the man whose theory of evolution by natural selection gave us the framework to understand life itself, to help us navigate the moral landscape of playing God with the blueprint of existence. I am your host, Artashes Khurshudyan, and tonight we commune with Charles Darwin, the reluctant revolutionary who gave us the tools to understand life and perhaps the wisdom to reshape it responsibly. This is Conversations with the Great Dad. Charles Robert Darwin lived from 1809 to 1882, an era when the very idea that species could change was considered not just wrong, but blasphemous. Born into a world that believed in the immutability of God's creation, he would spend decades collecting evidence that would fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of itself. The voyage of the HMS Beagle from 1831 to 1836 transformed a young theology student into the architect of modern biology. On the Galápagos Islands, observing finches with beaks perfectly adapted to their specific environments, Darwin began to glimpse the mechanism that drives all life, natural selection. But Darwin was no hasty revolutionary. He spent over 20 years refining his theory, knowing full well the storm it would unleash. When On the Origin of Species was finally published, it sold out on the first day and ignited debates that continue to this century. What Darwin could never have imagined is that we would one day possess the power to bypass natural selection entirely, to directly edit the genetic code, to eliminate hereditary diseases, to enhance human capabilities, to create entirely new forms of life. Today, as CRISPR technology makes genetic engineering as precise as word processing, we face questions that would have astounded Darwin. Should we eliminate genetic diseases from the human gene pool? Should we enhance our children's intelligence or physical capabilities? Are we directing evolution, or are we destroying something sacred in the process? Mr. Darwin, you have returned to a world where your theory of evolution is not only accepted, but where we have learned to harness the very mechanisms you describe. We can now directly edit genes with unprecedented precision. But I find myself wrestling with a profound philosophical question that your work illuminated. If natural selection is the engine of evolution, and we can now bypass that engine entirely, are we still operating within nature's laws, or have we transcended them altogether? I ask because there is something that both thrills and terrifies me about genetic engineering. We can eliminate Huntington's disease from a family line in a single generation, something that would take natural selection thousands of years, if it ever happened at all. Yes, I can shake the feeling that we are playing with the forces we don't fully comprehend. You spend decades observing the delicate balance of ecosystems. What wisdom would you offer about intervening so dramatically in processes that took eons to establish?
Your question strikes at the heart of everything I've spent my life contemplating. You speak of bypassing natural selection, but I wonder if that's quite accurate. Consider this. Natural selection itself has produced beings capable of reason, foresight, and deliberate action. Might not your genetic engineering capabilities be the latest expression of natural selection rather than a departure from it? I observed in my studies of domestic pigeons how human selection could produce remarkable variations in relatively short periods. What you describe with these molecular scissors sounds like an extension of that principle, but with unprecedented precision. The question that troubles me is not whether this is natural or unnatural, but whether we possess the wisdom to guide such processes responsibly. You see, in all my observations, I found that nature's great strength lies in its conservatism, coupled with constant experimentation. Most variations fail. They're either neutral or harmful. Only occasionally does a truly beneficial mutation arise, but the vast timescales allow for extensive testing, refinement, correction of mistakes.
That's exactly what keeps me awake at night, Mr. Darwin. We are essentially compressing millions of years of evolutionary trial and error into laboratory experiments that might last months. And here's what troubles me most deeply. We're not just editing other species. We are editing ourselves. We are directing human evolution for the first time in our species history. When I think about this, I feel like we are standing at a crossroads that might determine not just what we become, but whether we remain recognizably human at all. Some scientists argue this is simply the next step in evolution, that we have evolved the cognitive capacity to direct our own development, and it would be almost unnatural not to use it. Others worry we are about to shatter something essential about the human condition. Where do you find yourself in this debate?
This may be the most profound question I've ever encountered. Throughout my work, I came to understand that humans are subject to the same natural laws as every other living thing. We are not separate from nature, we are part of it, products of the same processes that shape the finches of the Galápagos, the orchids of my greenhouse, the earthworms in my garden. But if we can now direct our own evolution consciously, it suggests we have reached the threshold that no species has crossed before. We've become evolution becoming aware of itself, capable of making deliberate choices about its own trajectory. Yet this fills me with both wonder and deep concern. You see, natural selection operates without prejudice. The environment doesn't care about social class, race, ideology, or temporary cultural preferences. It simply favors traits that enhance survival and reproduction in specific circumstances. But human-directed evolution, here we introduce all our biases, our cultural assumptions, and our limited understanding.
You have touched on something that haunts me about this whole enterprise. Who decides what constitutes an improvement? Most people agree that eliminating Huntington's disease is good, but what about enhancing intelligence, or choosing eye color, or eliminating genetic predispositions to depression, anxiety, or even introversion? I worry that we might be optimizing for the wrong things entirely, creating what you might call show dogs of humanity that look perfect according to our current standards, but lack the hidden resilience that comes from genetic diversity? Are we at risk of engineering ourselves into evolutionary dead end? All because we confused our temporary preferences for objective improvements.
Your concern about genetic diversity strikes at something fundamental I observed throughout my career. In every ecosystem I studied, diversity provided strength, adaptability, and resilience. When I examined orchids, I marveled at the incredible variety, some mimicking insects, others producing intoxicating fragrances, still others with elaborate mechanical devices for pollination. This diversity made the entire family more successful. If our genetic interventions reduce human diversity, if we all optimize for the same traits, the same capabilities, the same appearance, we might create a more efficient human species in the short term, also a more fragile one in the long term. We could inadvertently create a genetic monoculture, vulnerable to challenges we cannot foresee. But here's what troubles me even more deeply. In my observations of domestic animals, I noticed how breeds created for specific purposes often became maladapted to natural conditions. A bulldog bred for a particular appearance struggles to breathe and reproduce naturally. Are we at risk of doing something similar to our own species, optimizing for current environments and values, while potentially crippling ourselves for future challenges?
That image of humanity as a breed of domestic animals shaped by our own preferences rather than environmental pressures is both striking and disturbing. It makes me think about the temporal dimension of these choices. The genetic modifications we make today will echo through generations, potentially forever. We are making decisions with consequences that won't fully unfold for decades or even centuries. Yet, we are basing those decisions on our current, inevitably limited understanding. But perhaps what troubles me most is this. If we can eliminate suffering through genetic intervention, diseases, disabilities, predispositions to mental illness, don't we have a moral obligation to do so? Yet, some of these conditions have also been sources of human creativity, insight, and empathy. How do we weigh immediate compassion against long-term wisdom? How do we decide what kinds of human experiences are worth preserving, even if they involve suffering?
You raise questions that go to the very heart of what it means to be human, to suffer, to strive, to grow through adversity. Throughout my work, I was struck by what might seem a terrible truth. Evolution operates through suffering, the struggle for existence, the pressure of competition, the harsh judgment of environmental challenges. These have been the forces that shaped all life, including human consciousness itself. Yet I cannot accept that suffering is inherently valuable. When I watched my own daughter Annie die of scarlet fever, I felt no gratitude for the evolutionary wisdom of disease. The capacity to alleviate suffering, this too is a product of evolution, an expression of the human moral sense that has itself evolved. Perhaps the answer lies in maintaining what I might call evolutionary humility, recognizing that our understanding is always partial, our predictions always uncertain. We must proceed with great caution, preserving options rather than closing them off, maintaining the diversity that has been life's greatest strength, while using our evolved capacities for compassion to reduce unnecessary suffering.
Your work ignited one of the greatest intellectual upheavals in human history, fundamentally challenging humanity's understanding of its place in creation. The conflict between evolutionary theory and religious belief continues today, but genetic engineering has added new dimensions that I think you would find fascinating. Some religious leaders now see genetic engineering as playing God in the most literal sense, taking on the role of creator, reshaping the very essence of life according to our will rather than divine plan. Others argue the opposite, that genetic engineering represents us fulfilling our God-given mandate to heal and improve creation, using our divinely granted intelligence as co-creators in ongoing work of creation. What strikes me is how your theory, which once seemed to diminish human specialness, might now actually elevate it. If we evolved the capacity to direct evolution itself, could this be seen as the universe becoming conscious of its own creative processes? Are we witnessing evolution's next phase, not just natural selection, but conscious selection?
Your observations touches upon something that has troubled me deeply since I first glimpsed the implications of natural selection. I was, once destined for the clergy myself. I had no desire to become religion's adversary, yet I found myself compelled by evidence to propose ideas that seemed to challenge the very foundations of faith and divine creation. But perhaps, and this thought has grown stronger in this ethereal realm, we are asking the wrong questions entirely. Instead of seeing evolution as the enemy of divine purpose, might it be the very mechanism through which divine purpose operates? Consider the elegance of the process I discovered. Principles so simple they can be summarized briefly, yet so powerful they account for all life's magnificent diversity. Could such an elegant mechanism itself be evidence of divine intelligence, rather than proof of its absence?
That's a beautiful way to frame it. Evolution as divine methodology rather than divine contradiction. But genetic engineering seems to take this to another level entirely. If evolution was God working through natural processes over deep time, then genetic engineering might be God working through human intelligence and technology over human time. We're not just discovering divine creation, we're participating in it. Yet this raises profound questions about responsibility and wisdom. When I consider the power we now wield, the ability to eliminate genetic diseases, enhance human capabilities, even create entirely new forms of life, I am simultaneously awed by the possibilities and terrified by the implications. Are we mature enough as a species to wield such godlike powers responsibly? What does it mean to be made in the image of God, if that includes the power to reshape the image itself?
Your question strikes at the very heart of what it means to bear the image of the divine, if such we do. Throughout my observations, I was continually amazed by the capacity for choice that had emerged through natural processes. Unlike other creatures that are bound entirely by instinct, humans can deliberate, can choose to act against their immediate impulses, can consider consequences across vast spans of time. If we are indeed created in the divine image, might that not include the capacity, perhaps even the obligation, to participate consciously in creation's ongoing work? After all, humans have always intervened in natural processes through agriculture, medicine, animal husbandry. Genetic engineering could be seen as the latest and most sophisticated expression of this creative partnership. But your concern about wisdom and maturity is profound. With great power comes, as they say, great responsibility. The question becomes not whether we should use these capabilities, but how we can develop the wisdom to use them well. This requires not just scientific knowledge, but moral development, spiritual insight, and deep humility about the consequences of our actions.
I am struck by how genetic engineering might actually deepen rather than diminish the mystery of creation. The more we learn about the genetic code, its intricate complexity, its elegant efficiency, its capacity for both stability and variation, the more astonishing it becomes. We are not demystifying life so much as discovering new depths to marvel at. But this brings me to a troubling paradox. As we gain the power to direct genetic changes, we're also learning how interconnected everything is. Every gene influences multiple traits. Every trait emerges from the interaction of many genes. The more precisely we can intervene, the more we realize how imprecise our understanding remains. How do we proceed responsibly when every intervention might have consequences we cannot foresee? Is there a way to honor both the power we have gained and the limits of our wisdom?
You've identified what may be the central paradox of conscious evolution. The more we understand about life's complexity, the more we realize how much we don't understand. Every answer generates new questions. Every intervention reveals new levels of interconnection we hadn't previously appreciated. In my study of orchids, I was continually amazed by the intricate relationships between flowers and their pollinators. Relationships that had co-evolved over vast periods. Alter one species and you affect countless others in ways they may be impossible to predict. This web of interconnection extends to every level of biological organization. Perhaps wisdom lies not in achieving perfect understanding before we act, but in developing better ways of acting with incomplete understanding. This might mean proceeding incrementally, preserving reversibility where possible, maintaining the diversity that provides resilience, and above all, remaining humble about our limitations. The capacity for such humility, the ability to hold great power with great restraint, these two might be part of what it means to bear the divine image.
That notion of divine humility is powerful. But let me press you on something that I think goes even deeper. The question of whether consciousness itself might be evolving. If we can enhance human intelligence, memory, emotional capacity, even moral insight through genetic modification, are we potentially transforming not just human capabilities, but the very nature of consciousness on Earth? Some philosophers and scientists speculate that we are approaching a threshold where human consciousness could be enhanced to degrees that we can barely imagine. Enhanced empathy, enhanced reasoning, enhanced creativity, perhaps even enhanced spiritual capacity. If consciousness is the universe's way of understanding itself, as some have suggested, then enhancing consciousness might be evolution's ultimate goal. Does this possibility excite or concern you more?
This possibility both thrills and terrifies me in equal measure. Throughout my work, I observed that consciousness represents something unprecedented in the history of life, the emergence of beings capable of understanding their own existence, of contemplating their place in the cosmos, of experiencing awe and wonder at the mystery of their own awareness. If we can enhance these capacities, if we can create beings with greater empathy, deeper insight, expanded creativity, we might indeed be participating in consciousness evolution on a cosmic scale. The universe becoming more aware of itself through enhanced minds. There is something magnificent about this prospect, yet I'm also deeply concerned about the implications. Enhanced consciousness means enhanced moral responsibility. Beings with greater capacity for understanding would also bear greater obligation to use that understanding wisely. Are we prepared for such responsibility? Can we ensure that enhanced consciousness leads to enhanced wisdom rather than enhanced folly? And there's another troubling possibility. What if enhanced consciousness leads to forms of awareness so different from current human experience that we can no longer relate to or understand one another? We might create minds so advanced that they leave unenhanced humans behind, leading to a kind of speciation within our own species.
Let me paint you a picture of what's actually happening in laboratories right now, because I think it would astound you. Scientists are creating organisms that have never existed in nature. Bacteria that eat plastic and excrete fuel. Mosquitoes genetically modified to carry genes that eliminate malaria from populations. Crops that can grow in drought conditions while producing enhanced nutrition. We are not just modifying life, we are creating entirely new forms of it. But what troubles me is that we are also patenting these creations. The genetic sequences of modified organisms, even human genes associated with diseases, have become intellectual property owned by corporations. The very essence of life, the hereditary material you showed us drives evolution, has become a commodity. How do we grapple with the idea that the fundamental building blocks of existence can be owned, bought, and even sold?
You describe something that goes far beyond anything I could have imagined. Not just the acceleration of evolutionary processes, but the deliberate creation of entirely novel life forms. And the commercialization of genetic information? This troubles me deeply. Throughout my observations, I was struck by how hereditary variation arises spontaneously, as if it were a gift of nature freely given. The variations upon which natural selection acts emerge through processes that no one controls or owns. But if humans can create these variations deliberately and claim ownership over them, what happens to the free flow of genetic information that has driven evolution for billions of years? This raises profound questions about the commons of life itself. If genetic information becomes property, are we creating barriers to the very processes that give rise to all existence? Are we potentially stifling the creativity that has been life's greatest strength?
Your concern about the genetic commons is shared by many scientists and ethicists today. Some are working on open source approaches to genetic modifications, freely available innovations that can't be monopolized. But here's what I found both fascinating and troubling. We are also seeing the democratization of genetic engineering. People are setting up sophisticated laboratories in their garages, modifying organisms outside traditional institutional oversight. On one hand, this democratization could probably accelerate beneficial discoveries and prevent the concentration of genetic power in the hands of a few corporations or governments. On the other hand, it means that potentially dangerous experiments could be conducted by anyone with knowledge and equipment. How do we balance the benefits of widespread access to these tools with the risk of uncontrolled experimentation?
This presents a paradox I recognize from my own time. The democratization of knowledge and capability can lead to wonderful discoveries. Some of my most important insights came from correspondence with amateur naturalists, gardeners, and breeders who shared their observations freely. The diversity of perspectives and approaches often leads to insights that no single institution could achieve. Yet the power you describe is of an entirely different order. In my time, a failed breeding experiment might affect a few pigeons or plants, but genetic modifications, especially those designed to spread through wild populations, could have consequences that cascade through entire ecosystems. Perhaps the answer lies not in restricting access to knowledge, but in cultivating wisdom alongside capability. Every person who gains the power to modify life should also gain deep understanding of evolution, ecology, and ethics. The tools should come with the wisdom to use them responsibly.
That ideal of wisdom accompanying capability is beautiful, but I wonder if it is realistic given the pace of technological development. We are creating tools faster than we are developing the wisdom to use them. And there is another dimension that I think would fascinate you. We are not just creating new organisms. We are creating organisms with entirely synthetic DNA, genetic codes that don't exist anywhere in nature. This seems to represent a new phase in evolution itself, I guess. Instead of just rearranging existing genetic information, we're writing entirely new genetic languages. Some scientists talk about this as evolution 2.0, evolution that not just conscious but creative in ways that natural selection never could be. Are we witnessing the emergence of a fundamentally new form of evolutionary process?
What you describe sounds like the birth of artificial speciation, not just the modification of existing species, but the creation of entirely new lineages with no natural ancestry. This represents something unprecedented in the 4 billion year history of life. In all my observations, evolution worked through modification of existing forms. Even the most dramatic changes built upon prior structures, prior genetic foundations. But synthetic biology suggests the possibility of creating life de novo, writing new chapters in the book of life using alphabets that nature never invented. This could represent evolution transcending its own historical constraints. Instead of being limited by the genetic heritage accumulated over deep time, we could create organisms optimized for entirely new purposes, new environments, new possibilities. Yet this also means accepting unprecedented responsibility. Every synthetic organism we create becomes our permanent responsibility. Unlike natural evolution, which tests modifications over vast timescales, synthetic biology places the burden of prediction and consequence entirely on our shoulders.
And that brings me to perhaps the most profound question. What happens when this technology converges with human enhancement? We are already conducting experiments that could enhance human intelligence, physical capabilities, disease resistance, even lifespan. Some researchers believe we could eventually enhance human consciousness itself, our capacity for reasoning, creativity, empathy, even spiritual insight. If we can create humans with significantly enhanced capabilities, we might be engineering the next phase of human evolution. But this also raises the specter of creating permanent genetic classes, enhanced humans who are literally superior in measurable ways, and unenhanced humans who lack access to these improvements. Are we on the verge of speciating into multiple human subspecies based on genetic enhancement rather than geographical isolation?
This scenario both fascinates and horrifies me. In my studies of finches on different islands, I observed how geographical isolation led to divergent evolution, eventually creating distinct species. But what you described could create reproductive isolation within the same geographical space, based on genetic modifications rather than physical barriers. If enhanced humans develop preferences for mating with others who share their enhancements, speciation could occur rapidly. Unlike natural speciation, which typically takes thousands of generations, genetic enhancement could accelerate this process dramatically. We could witness the emergence of multiple human species within a few centuries. The social implications are staggering. Natural selection operates without regard for justice or fairness. It simply favors traits that enhance survival and reproduction. But human-directed evolution operates within social and economic systems that are often profoundly unjust. If genetic enhancements are available only to the wealthy, we might see the emergence of a biological aristocracy. Yet there is also the possibility that genetic enhancement could reduce rather than increase equality if beneficial modifications become as widely accessible as medical treatments. The question is whether we can develop social institutions wise enough to guide this process toward justice rather than oppression.
As we explore the ethical dimensions of genetic engineering, I find myself grappling with the questions that seem to have no clear answers. If we can eliminate genetic diseases, don't we have a moral obligation to do so? Yet where exactly does treatment end and enhancement begin? And more troubling still, who makes these decisions? And on what grounds? I think about conditions like deafness or dwarfism or autism, conditions that cause challenges in our current society but that also contribute to human diversity and culture. Some deaf individuals don't see deafness as a disability to be cured, but as a cultural identity to be preserved. Some people with autism speak of their condition as providing unique insights and capabilities. Are we at risk of creating a kind of genetic conformity that eliminates valuable forms of human diversity in the name of preventing suffering?
Your question illuminates one of the deepest challenges we face. Throughout my work, I observed that what appears to be a disadvantage in one context often proves beneficial in another. Variation itself is essential to life's resilience and continued evolution. The traits that seem problematic today might be exactly what humanity needs to survive future challenges we cannot imagine. Yet I cannot dismiss the reality of suffering. When I lost my daughter Annie to disease, I would have given anything to prevent her pain. The moral imperative to alleviate suffering is real and immediate, even when the long-term consequences of our interventions remain uncertain. Perhaps wisdom lies in distinguishing between eliminating suffering and eliminating difference. We might focus on interventions that expand human capabilities while preserving the diversity that has been our species' greatest strength. Instead of trying to optimize all humans toward a single ideal, we could enhance our capacity to flourish in different ways.
That's a beautiful distinction, expanding capabilities while preserving diversity. But it raises complex questions about implementation. Enhancement technologies will likely be expensive initially, available only to those who can afford them. This could create not just inequality of opportunity, but inequality of fundamental biological capacity. Imagine a world where some children are born with enhanced intelligence, disease resistance, and longevity, while others lack this advantage simply because of their family's economic circumstances. We're not just talking about different educational opportunities or life chances. We're talking about different biological endowments. How do we prevent genetic enhancement from creating permanent caste systems based on the biological lottery of birth?
This concern strikes at the heart of what it means to create a just society when we have the power to modify human nature itself. Natural selection has always operated without regard for fairness. Some are born with genetic advantages, others with disadvantages. But at least these differences arose through processes beyond human control. When we can deliberately create genetic advantages, we assume moral responsibility for their distribution. If genetic enhancements become available but remain accessible only to the wealthy, we would be deliberately creating biological inequality in a way that nature, for all its apparent cruelty, never has. This suggests we need new social institutions, new ways of ensuring that the benefits of genetic enhancement serve humanity as a whole, rather than deepening existing divisions. Perhaps genetic enhancement should be treated as a public good, like education or healthcare, rather than a private commodity.
But even if we solve the distribution problem, we face deeper questions about what kinds of enhancements we should pursue. Different cultures value different traits. Some might prioritize intelligence, others physical prowess, still others creativity or spiritual capacity. If genetic enhancement becomes possible and widely accessible, we might see different societies enhancing their populations in different directions. This could lead to a kind of a conscious speciation, different human populations deliberately diverging based on cultural values rather than environmental pressures. We could end up with multiple branches of humanity: the intellectually enhanced, the physically enhanced, the artistically enhanced, the spiritually enhanced. Is this exciting expansion of human possibility or a fragmentation that could lead to conflict and misunderstanding?
What you describe could represent the next great diversification in human evolution, but driven by conscious choice rather than environmental pressure. Different populations pursuing different paths of enhancement based on their values and aspirations. In my observations of nature, I found that diversity generally increases resilience and adaptive capacity. Multiple human subspecies, each optimized for different capabilities, might collectively be stronger and more adaptable than any single enhanced population could be. Yet this also presents unprecedented challenges for social cohesion and mutual understanding. If enhanced populations become too different from one another, they might lose the ability to relate to or cooperate with each other. We could fragment into separate species that view each other as alien, potentially leading to conflict or even replacement of some populations by others.
This brings me to what might be the most profound question of all: our obligations to future generations. The genetic modifications we make today will echo through all subsequent generations. We are making irreversible decisions about the future of human evolution based on our current, inevitably, limited understanding. Do we have the right to make such sweeping changes to the human genome? What if future generations disagree with our choices? What if our improvements turn out to be maladaptations to challenges we couldn't foresee? Are we being responsible stewards of human evolution, or are we imposing our temporary preferences on all future humanity?
This may be the weightiest responsibility any species has ever faced. In natural evolution, each generation passes on modifications to the next without choice or consent. But those modifications have been tested through the harsh but effective filter of natural selection over vast periods. When we modify the human genome consciously, we assume responsibility for outcomes that natural selection would have refined over millennia. We compress millions of years of evolutionary testing into decades of human judgment. This suggests a profound obligation to preserve options rather than foreclose them, to enhance human capacity for adaptation rather than optimizing for specific current conditions. We must think not just as parents concerned for our immediate children, but as ancestors responsible for the entire future of human consciousness. Perhaps the most important enhancement we could make would be to our own capacity for wisdom. Our ability to consider long-term consequences, to care for the welfare of beings we will never meet, to make decisions that serve not just our generation, but all generations to come.
Mr. Darwin, as our conversation draws to a close, I am struck by how genetic engineering represents both the culmination and the transformation of our insights about evolution. We have gained the power to direct evolutionary processes that you spent your life understanding. Yet this power comes with responsibilities that seem almost beyond human comprehension. Looking toward the future where genetic engineering becomes commonplace, where we routinely modify ourselves and other species, where we might even enhance human consciousness itself, what wisdom would you leave us as we navigate this unprecedented transformation? How do we honor the evolutionary processes that created us while taking responsibly for consciously directing their future course?
As I prepare to return to whatever realm awaits beyond this conversation, I'm filled with both awe and humility at what you've described. The power to direct evolution consciously represents perhaps the greatest threshold any species has crossed. The moment when evolution becomes aware of itself and capable of making deliberate choices about its own trajectory. This is both humanity's greatest opportunity and its greatest test. You have the power to eliminate suffering, to enhance human capabilities, to create new forms of life that could flourish in ways we cannot imagine. But you also have the power to disrupt billions of years of evolutionary wisdom, to create new forms of suffering, fundamentally alter the trajectory of consciousness itself. I urge you to proceed with what I would call evolutionary wisdom, deep respect for the processes that brought you to this point, combined with careful, thoughtful intervention guided by humility about the limits of your understanding. Remember that evolution's greatest strength has always been its capacity to experiment while preserving diversity, to adapt while maintaining resilience.
What practical guidance would you offer for navigating the specific choices we face? Which diseases to eliminate? Which enhancements to pursue? How to ensure justice in access to genetic modifications?
I would offer several principles drawn from my understanding of how life has successfully evolved and flourished over billions of years. First, preserve diversity above all else. Whatever modifications you make, ensure they expand rather than contract the range of human possibility. Avoid any intervention that reduces the overall variation in human populations or other species. Second, proceed incrementally and reversibly where possible. Make small changes and observe their effects across multiple generations before making larger ones. Prefer interventions that can be modified or corrected as your understanding grows. Third, consider the web of relationships in which every species exists. No organism lives in isolation. Every modification affects not just the target species, but countless others through complex ecological and social networks. Fourth, maintain humility about your understanding. The more you learn about life's complexity, the more you realize how much remains unknown. Let this humility guide your choices, encouraging caution rather than reckless confidence.
And what about the question of human enhancement specifically? The possibility of improving intelligence, extending lifespan, even enhancing consciousness itself. How should we approach our power to remake human nature?
The enhancement of human consciousness represents perhaps the most profound possibility and responsibility you face. If consciousness is indeed the universe's way of understanding itself, then enhancing consciousness might serve purposes far grander than individual benefit. But approach this power with extraordinary care. Enhanced consciousness means enhanced moral responsibility. Beings with greater capacity for understanding must bear greater obligation to use that understanding wisely. Are you prepared to create minds that might surpass your own in wisdom, compassion, and moral insight? Focus your enhancements not just on raw capability, but on wisdom, empathy, and the capacity for long-term thinking. If you must modify human nature, modify it toward greater rather than lesser moral sensitivity, toward deeper rather than shallower care for all life.
Finally, how do we balance the competing demands of advancing human capabilities while preserving what we value most about being human? How do we ensure that in gaining new powers, we don't lose essential aspects of the human experience?
Perhaps the question is not whether we remain human in some fixed sense, but whether we remain worthy of the consciousness that evolution has given us. Human nature has never been static. It has always been evolving, always being shaped by culture, technology, and choice. The goal should not be to preserve some imagined essential human nature, but to guide human development toward greater capacity for wisdom, compassion, and wonder at the mystery of existence. If genetic enhancement can serve these ends, if it can create beings more capable of love, understanding, and care for all life, then it fulfills rather than betrays evolution's deepest purposes. Trusting the same qualities that enabled life to flourish for billions of years. Careful experimentation balanced by conservation of diversity, responsiveness to feedback, and above all, humility in the face of mystery. The future you create may be unlike anything that has existed before, but if you ground your choices in these evolutionary virtues, you may succeed in creating something truly magnificent. Remember that you are not separate from nature, but part of it. Your capacity for genetic engineering is itself a product of evolution, an expression of the same creative force that gave rise to all life. Use this power wisely, with deep reverence for the mystery of existence and profound responsibility for the future of consciousness itself.
Thank you, Mr. Darwin, for helping us see that genetic engineering is not an abandonment of evolution, but perhaps its fulfillment, the emergence of conscious beings capable of participating deliberately in the creative processes that shape them. Your wisdom reminds us that as we gain the power to reshape life itself, we must do so with humility, compassion, and deep respect for the evolutionary heritage that brought us to this extraordinary threshold. The questions you have helped us explore about diversity and enhancement, suffering and adaptation, individual benefit and collective responsibility, these are not abstract philosophical puzzles, but urgent practical challenges that will define the future of consciousness on Earth. Every choice we make about genetic engineering is a choice about what kinds of beings we want to become and what kinds of world we want to create. If this conversation has sparked questions about our genetic future, that's precisely the point. The decisions we make about genetic engineering in the coming decades will determine not just what humanity becomes, but what life itself might become. We stand at a threshold that no species has ever crossed, the moment when evolution becomes conscious of itself and capable of directing its own future course. That was Charles Darwin, the naturalist who gave us the framework to understand life's magnificent complexity and our place within it. His insights remind us that as we become the conscious directors of evolution, we must proceed with the wisdom of 4 billion years of evolutionary experience guiding our choices. If you like this episode, leave your comments and subscribe. Next time on Conversations with the Great Dead, we summon Nelson Mandela, anti-apartheid revolutionary and political leader, to discuss Armenian Velvet Revolution and lessons learned. Until then, remember, we are not separate from nature, but part of it, and the power we know will to reshape life itself comes with responsibility to use it wisely, for we may be evolution's greatest experiment yet. This episode was inspired by Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, contemporary debates about genetic engineering, and ongoing discussions about human enhancement and bioethics. Special consideration was given to perspectives from disability rights advocates and bioethicists working on the governance of emerging genetic technologies.